now you do know whether you're on course, because you have to keep making sure you're expressing those values. And if you're not on course. What happens is these inner critics we all carry around with us wake up, turn up the volume, and really can get in our way, persevering. But it isn't a virtue if you're stuck in a career that's really wrong for you. It actually means you're prioritizing and protecting the wrong things.
Pivot in your confidence, career, and compensation with the 5-Minute Career Hack Podcast every Monday and Thursday. Now get ready for a special interview curated just for you. Welcome back to the 5-Minute Career Hack Podcast, where we help individuals pivot in their confidence, career, and compensation. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the wonderful guests that we have on our podcast every week. Today is nothing short of amazing. We have another guest from across the pond, all the way just south of London in the UK, Helen Hanision. Welcome to the podcast, Helen. How are you today?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really good. Really happy to be here.
Thanks so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. I know our audience is in for a special treat today. You are an Amazon best-selling author of the book Unstuck. But before we get into the book, I want you to define what does it actually mean to be stuck?
Do you know what? It's a tough one, isn't it? It means something slightly different to everyone, and that's sort of the point. It's okay. I was on a radio interview a few weeks ago in the UK, and it was a panel, and everyone that was coming on to ask me something talked about their career context and something that they were unhappy about, but didn't love owning the word stuck. And it just said it all to me. What they then explained resonated for me so strongly as what I would call stuckness. And I think being stuck is knowing that you're anything less than 100% happy in work that feels wrong, but not knowing what to do about that, or knowing exactly what you wish would happen next, but not how to get yourself there. So you're stuck. And really, it's that feeling of being completely disempowered and sort of, I suppose, hope has gone. That is what I think stuck really speaks to.
So less than 100%. So 98, 97. So less than 100%, right?
Yeah. And I tell you why I'm sort of quite bold about that. I mean, that's quite dramatic, isn't it? I tell you why. What happens is, by the time somebody tips into a coaching relationship with me, particularly one-to-one, where they tend to be seasoned professionals, they've been less than unhappy, maybe a decade, maybe more ago, and it's grown louder for them. It's a little bit like when a little kid sort of tugs on your sleeve, and you know, it's easy to ignore for a minute, and then it's really insistent over time. And in the end, it's undeniable. You have to turn and sort of give that little kiddo of yours some attention and sort of fix that. I think stuckness grows in much the same way. It starts as a little whisper, quiet rumble, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the end, it's paralyzed us. And that level of loathing what you do every day can seep into everything else in life. It doesn't just stay neatly in that little career space that it starts.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting that you said that. I did a podcast early this year, Negotiate Anything, with Kwame Christian, and we were talking about boundaries, but we were also talking about what I believe to be the thing that gets us to the place where we end up burnt out. And it's this idea or this notion that our personal and professional lives are separate, and that they don't bleed over. And what you just described is the fact that eventually it just boils over, and it does cross over, right? Because if you believe they're separate, you might operate one way, but then ultimately, once it starts bleeding and you're unhappy, the stuckness as you described it, then you have to do something about it.
Yeah. And if not, it is kind of, in careerist terms, it can be fatal. And I think that's really important. I don't know where this social construct sort of comes from, that we have a personal life here and a professional one here. But I think that's the problem. We are all one person. I don't believe in hard boundaries between the two. I think I agree exactly with what you've said. And it also explains why you can be professionally successful And I know from my own experience, I sort of left my career not because I was failing, because it no longer resonated for me and that was coming at too high a cost. And I would say that is the kind of stuckness that I notice clients of mine have in common. They, it's just untenable every day till we retire. Suddenly it feels obvious that is not something we can tolerate.
So you're extremely successful, right? I would like to consider myself highly successful. Why? Tell me, why would someone that's amazing, talented, smart, and just doing amazing things in their career and their professional journey even, why would they stay somewhere in a career, in a profession that they're not happy with? Why would they do that?
Are you feeling stuck in your career still? Are you finally ready to stop going through the motions and start living with purpose? Listen, my career moves so fast, and I was the expert at embracing every learning and promotion opportunity that was available to me. By the time I reached the executive role, I was burned out, and I realized that I just had a concept of a plan and no clear and fulfilling strategy for meaningful change. I had to go on a journey to discover my passions and my purpose so that I could build a life and a career with intention. Join us for the Burn the Rulebook Career Transformation Lab. It's going to be a transformative 3-day experience happening from October 15th to the 17th. Over these 3 days, we will help you prepare, position, and live on purpose in both your life and your career. You'll dive deep into strategies designed to help you stop playing by the rules that have held you back and take control of your future. We'll give you the tools to execute with confidence so that you're not just talking about change, you're making it happen. Finally, you build an actionable plan to drive your career forward and set yourself up for long-term success. Imagine walking away with the clarity, focus, and confidence to thrive, not just professionally, but in every part of your life. This is more than just a workshop. It is your blueprint for a career and a life lived on purpose. Ready to rewrite the rules? Secure your spot today for the Burn the Rulebook Career Transformation Lab and get ready to take action and transform your future.
You know, it's a from where we are, it's a real puzzle, isn't it? I think the problem is it's not that clear for the person when you're in deep, when you're really just every week runs at 100 miles an hour. So you're busy managing a team, meeting deliverables and deadlines. And it's all a bit of a crazy swirl, probably mixed in with family or other priorities as outside of work. So it's we don't really give ourselves, if you think about it, that kind of reflection time. And I think that's how it creeps up on us, actually, that really what we're feeling is horribly stuck, and that's unsufferable. And that is, I think, probably the biggest. There is another one, I think, for smart, successful people. And you're right, I only really work with bright, accomplished professionals, and this is still true for them. And I think there's a paradox that a lot of high achievers face. They feel this sort of deep sense of discontent because they've outgrown their current work. They're stuck in work that is somehow wrong. Maybe it used to be right. Maybe they were just distracted enough by the success markers and the promotions and, the sense of progress. And that's quite normal too. But what happens is there's another one of those social prescriptions about persistence and perseverance. We think it's a virtue and we apply it and we're really great at it. We're almost too outstanding at persevering. But it isn't a virtue if you're stuck in a career that's really wrong for you. It actually means you're prioritizing and protecting the wrong things, the status quo that doesn't serve you anymore. So I think is all of this, people stay stuck because of a combination maybe of fear of failing, and it might be a long drop down if they are in a success trap, and that's the stuckness. But fear of losing everything they've built, fear of not having clarity on what they actually want to step into for their next career chapter, fear of what others will think about it. And I think the problem is the comfort of that familiarity outweighs the discomfort of making change happen. And that's quite paralyzing. So I would say I see my work, and particularly in Unstuck, is about helping people by realigning their careers with their values, with what feels purposeful, and having that clarity and confidence to build forward in an agile way, feeling safe that it's not a huge transformative, disruptive step. It's little steps of disruption that accrue and are actually your fastest route to aligned career transformation, because by then you know what you want for yourselves and you're confident you can see how to make that happen.
So you said a lot there, but I want to make sure for the audience, if you're not taking notes, this is the time to pull that pen out or just rewind what Helen just said. Perseverance is not a virtue if it's directed at the wrong thing. And I'm paraphrasing because that's not exactly how you said it, but it's not a virtue if you're directing at the wrong thing. And the wrong thing can be, which you also mentioned, the success trap, right? The success trap that we're trained on at a very early age, right? It doesn't start in your career. We're
Yeah.
actually trained on that.
Do you know what? I think we're trained on it earlier. Education, if you think about it, we're literally given scores. It's quite gamified. We get marks academically all the way through our education sort of journey. And I think that's where we learn this success from. And I think these days, maybe education is a bit better than sort of a few decades ago about understanding it shouldn't all be built on self-esteem. Self-compassion needs to be part of it. Self-comparison is really dangerous. But nevertheless, in the end, you go to university, you get a mark, you get a grade, don't you? And I think that's what we carry with us into our careers. We have to get used to not having a literal score anymore, but we use these success markers, these sort of ways of progressing through the ranks, to set our ambitions and our aspirations and to measure ourselves, our self-worth, everything that matters against that growth. So yeah, I think it's a tough place again to step back and be strategic. And there's some amazing statistics I read recently that something like 98% of professional people do understand being strategic or would support this, that is hugely significant to their careers. It matters massively. And yet 96% say they don't give that proper time, for themselves. So there's another massive gap that needs to be closed to help people really invest in this sort of reflection that allows for a reset.
Absolutely. I think that's what you said there is so important, that we create markers because we don't have the scores that we were accustomed to, the grades, the GPA, the scores on the standardized testing. We turn those into money, titles, and accomplishments on the job, year-over-year performance, and things of that nature, to be able to feel that sense of success and accomplishment that we hit this mark. And so if we subscribe to that, even though, we're persevering and we're getting it done and we're finishing the task and gaining the notoriety, but we're unhappy in the role, or we're no longer happy with what we're doing because it's just a mark. You can get marks in anything, right? That's how I see it. You can get a mark in anything.
Totally. And it's so hard, I think, sometimes to understand that maybe your career is being built on competencies and capabilities. And I think maybe when you're junior and career building, you just appreciate the progress that, it's nice to feel good at it. And, that's great. However, if it doesn't light you up, that's the kind of disconnect that over time leads to this feeling of being very stuck, because now you've either been promoted away from something that you used to absolutely love, gives you sort of job joy, and now you're in charge of other people doing that, and it's maybe more about the P&L and all the commercial imperatives, and that's one problem. But another might be that just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're also passionate and purposeful about it. And that's a hard one for people to unpick.
It's part of my life struggle. I think it's so interesting that you said that. And again, smart, amazingly talented. I'm a great person. I've done great things in my career. And because of the diversity of the roles that I've held, I've been able to learn and do things very successful, even inside of some of my roles that I'm not passionate about. So should I stay there? Should I not? Right? And I imagine some
No,
people listening feel
absolutely.
that.
And yeah, and it's so hard, isn't it? And I think what happens is most people, I don't know enough about your experience, but most people will wait until it's so undeniable to take the disruptive steps to do something different and get a different result. And I suppose what I'm here saying is, once you feel a whisper of stuckness, that's the time to put thought into it, not to rush into anything, but to start ideating about what do you wish you could do next? What could you point those strengths at that would also feel like it had meaning and was purposeful for you? And that's probably the magic source of purposeful career redesign, is that exact equation.
Which we're going to talk about, which is your new course that's out. We'll talk about that. Don't worry, we're coming to it. But I think that part about, you mentioned about comfort versus discomfort, our brains are wired to not desire change because they requires our brains, are set up to keep us alive. That's the whole goal, right? Keep us alive, protect us from harm, so they can be predisposed to negativity and discomfort, because that doesn't allow us to continue going along with the things that we know. And so that unknown for the brain is like, now I've got to go figure out a bunch of stuff because this is uncharted territory. These are uncharted feelings and thoughts. And I think that's part of why we avoid the discomfort of even beginning to ideate when we hear that first whisper, because it's not the norm and we're predisposed to keep things the same.
Absolutely. We will, it's human nature, isn't it? We will always want to protect the status quo. And you're back to this idea of perseverance, aren't you? We think that's what's expected of us, and we think that's the safest route, and we think that's the most important thing, because it protects that nice linear feeling of making progress in career and life. But it's not the smartest way to engage with uncomfortable feelings. And that's really difficult to persuade somebody of. It's a lot about readiness, I think, really being clear. And I think for smart, accomplished, successful people, probably you're going to have to try a few things yourself before you are ready to accept, I'm solving the wrong problems or something. I'm achieving change, but it seems to be situational. And I'm back at this point of unhappiness or stuckness again in 6 months, 9 months, whatever it might be. And that's probably the most important tipping point I look for when I invite somebody to work with me. That real understanding and readiness that this is so uncomfortable, it must be engaged with for them to feel fulfilled in their next career chapter.
So you're saying from a coach's perspective, because I think this is important for the audience as well, either they're in one bucket or the other. They haven't quite gotten to that tipping point, or they're at that tipping point. And it's at the tipping point is when you can really do amazing work to help them. Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, I think that's exactly it. If somebody is got some curiosity about what else they might do, I would say tune into that little inner voice and, maybe buy the book, explore the ideas, try and apply some of the concepts to your own specific situation and what you're feeling stuck with. And maybe a bit of job crafting is enough. Is a bit of a career shift or pivot. It doesn't need to be enormous. However, there's a long way to go from there to a point where somebody is just feeling in the grips of stuckness. They are feeling so inhabited by this oppressive feeling every day. is bankrupt of all meaning and drags. So these are the tells. This is how you know if what you're feeling is stuck and not bored or anticlimactical. Very often people will come into a coaching relationship and explain they achieved a really important business win or promotion, or they secured the role that sort of elevated them into leadership, and suddenly feel like they're floundering where they really thought they would be flourishing and can't understand that, to be frustrated by that and worried by that. And that's another expression of stuckness. And I think it's hard at that point to misname what's going on. And we can just explain it away again and again, really quite effectively. We're horribly good at this, where we sort of say, oh, it's because that was so big last year. So probably by next year, I'll just recalibrate. It'll take a while and that's okay. And there you are. We're choosing to stay stuck again. And that's where I think there's this sort of magic source of tuning in instead to the really uncomfortable thoughts that are sitting behind that, and exploring what could you do with that? How could you utilize that discomfort to make something better for yourself?
So from the context of this Amazon best-selling book, Unstuck, how does a person go about getting unstuck?
So I think the first thing, and I would say the book is written in 3 acts of purposeful career redesign. And the first one is called Alignment. And it's got 3 chapters in it. And one is about strengths. And I find people are quite fluent when, career people, about articulating those. We've been probably heard them in appraisals. We know we've been appreciated for them, and they probably started before our careers, sort of earlier in our lives. So we know what we're innately good at and the strengths we've accrued and, have cultivated intentionally since. But there is this really important piece about, are we also getting joy from doing those things, or are we just employing competencies because it suits the needs of the business? And it leaves us a bit cold, because that's your first clue that if you're not already, in time you will start to feel very sort of dissonant about what you do for work. But from there, we quite quickly go on to talk about values in the book. And unpacking those is a bit harder because they do sit under the surface. They also evolve over time as our priorities shift and we have different life experiences and events that, are out of our choosing that impact those. So that's really important. And then we look at, do those things cross the strengths and the values? Is one driving another? Are they overlapping? Because that's the sweet spot of synergy, where what you're best at is also what you enjoy most and feels purposeful. So we start to examine all of that. I call it a career compass, but really you could just visualize a Venn diagram and sort of you'd get the idea. And we sort of package it all up with, what about this more action-oriented thing, purpose? How do we breathe life into that? What does that actually mean? Because otherwise it's quite lofty language. So that's the first, you asked what do we do first, and it's very introspective at first, but I really encourage people to sort of hesitate there and use their real life anecdotes and stories to really dig into what's going on for them and what they're reacting to when time drags versus when they're so immersed in what they're doing, they're experiencing flow and they didn't even realize 4 hours just went by. So it's really important to tap into all that everyday sort of self-expertise that we don't probably pay enough attention to normally.
Or slow down enough to pay attention to, right? I think that's such an incredible way to describe it, and thinking about how someone has this overlap that you described of what they're really good at and what is part of their purpose. When there's that overlap, that's kind of where the synergy and the magic is, the good feeling, the longevity, the duration, where I should persevere. Is that accurate? Did I characterize that the right way? Because I want the audience to really understand.
Yeah, I often think of it, if I explain it this way, I think any career redesign plan should be strengths-based, because then we know it's realistic. to hope for. You know, it's based on things we know we're strong at, good at, and can leverage. However, strengths don't set the direction, values do. So if we get that distinction clear in our minds when we're doing this alignment work, what felt very foggy and confusing and is a massive reason for someone to be stuck in a career that they're no longer happy with suddenly feels easy, because now you've compartmentalized. I've got to know I'm good at this thing I want to do, or else we're all in fantasy land. However, that is not directional for me. Values sets the direction. And suddenly, much like a compass, you don't need to know the exact role you're shooting for, but now you do know whether you're on course, because you have to keep making sure you're expressing those values. And if you're not on course. So it sort of makes things, it's very hard to articulate, but as someone goes through the process, I promise it's very, very clear all of a sudden. And it's a bit like a fog lifting, I think, that first act of alignment.
Yeah, and I think it may sound cloudy, lofty, but I believe it's the deep work, the internal deep work that we must do in order to uncover. And when I say uncover, I talk a lot about how as children it's kind of one of the best times, and so some of this will be buried in your childhood, but then life happens, expectations happen, school happens, your parents, good intentioned, happen to you as well, teachers, coaches, you name it, influence how you go about life, friends, social groups, all of that starts to influence you and direct you. And so then you have all this stuff on top of you that you have to now uncover and peel back to get to those core values, those things that have, changed, potentially evolved over the years to where you are now. And that's okay. But the work, it's worth it if you've already started to hear those whispers. It's absolutely worth it.
Yes.
It's absolutely worth the time and
Yes.
energy.
That absolutely, I agree. That's the cue, isn't it, to step into this inner work and start really just unraveling what's going on for you under the surface. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's good. So that's step one. We're going to do some internal reflection. We're going to understand, like, really tap into our strengths. We're going to also make sure we really, really understand our values as they present today. No, they're not absolute and they can ultimately evolve with time, but we're really going to do that work first. What's the second step for someone? Now they've figured out these are my strengths, here's some of my overlap. These are the values that are important to me that's going to guide me through this next step. What's the next step for that individual?
So the next step is the act of career redesign. So now we're going to take all that inner work from Act 1 and move it into outer work. And we start ideating, as I would call it. My own career one was public relations, and ideation was just an everyday part of what we did for our clients. So I help people understand how to do that for themselves. And it isn't easy if someone has been very committed to their career for years, sometimes decades, to rethink. But it is taking the skill of suspending judgment and just rethinking and coming up with not just one alternate reality, what would you do, but three. And I think that's really important. We sort of get the juices flowing, if you like, with an easy one. Just how would you make what you're doing today better? And I would say that's a bit more about job crafting. And then by the third one, we're into something completely blue sky. And it used to be more amusing than it is now to sort of say, let's pretend the world had a pandemic and, what you did was no longer relevant to anyone and, the industry disappeared. Now, what would you do? But it's that sort of thing. Because what you find is by the time you've gone through 3 sort of ideation processes and people have come up with ideas, that's enough to shift perspective, that they're not on some kind of singular path that's available to them. There's not such a thing as one true career either, because look, there's 3 now on paper. So what happens is they don't, not necessarily committed to going to any of those, but what very often happens is that people merge all three, or they take the favorite bits from 1 and 3 and sort of make a hybrid, or it's sparked enough creativity and openness that it's reignited their hope. And with that comes some agency. And that's what I'm actually looking for, why we do all the sort of the alignment work first, because you can't just jump straight into this. It needs to be really grounded in that foundational stuff, strengths and values and sense of purpose, because then you can assess your own ideas, your own sort of creative thinking, if you like, for career redesign. And then it gets all very concrete. We set a what next quest, where people start to name little pilot tests, and really they're just coming up with a couple of questions about the big idea they are most curious to pursue. And those could be real life experiments. They can be informational conversations with people who are already where they think they'd like to go next. But you'll get information gathering to refine that career redesign, and it's concrete and it's actionable, and it's really the polar opposite of the work of alignment. So it's the inner work and then the reflected outer work in these first 2 acts.
Which is amazing. And I'm going to have you mention the third act just so that the audience kind of has an idea of what the third act is, because those first 2 steps require some work on your part, and it's going to be a little uncomfortable, might make you a little nervous, might make you a little anxious, even that you're starting to see something that you've never seen before in your career. And now I feel like I have to change this, or I have to do something about this, but I'm not quite ready. But I'll have you mention it for the audience for the sake of time. And we'll go ahead and actually drop a link for you to be able to purchase Helen's book, Unstuck, in the show notes so that you guys can get access to that. But if you would just briefly talk a little bit about that last act. So 3 acts in this whole redesign.
Yeah. Yes. And the third and final act is called transformation. And if you sort of look at the acronym, I had a bit of fun because that's what ACT stands for, isn't it? Aligned, Career Redesign, Transformation. So transformation is the third one. I think in some ways it sounds counterintuitive, but it's the most important one, because what happens for people once they get to completing their career redesign with all this self-knowledge is that they figure out it's not enough on its own, because what happens is these inner critics we all carry around with us wake up, turn up the volume, and really can get in our way, or there's some sort of practical obstacle that we couldn't have foreseen that is now presents itself, and it's something we have to navigate or sort of admit defeat. So there's more to go even when we think we've finished, and that's what transformation is all about. And those last few chapters are all about the mindset mastery, and I pull, I suppose, a bit more on positive psychology, and I'm a narrative therapist as well, so I really weave in those tools to help people understand how to, I suppose, pull on ways to shift their thinking when they notice, oh no, I'm stuck again. Because actually that's what this is going to take if we're going to sustain our efforts long enough to succeed. And the same goes for hoping the right way. What are the practical, really thorny, practical, sticky things? It might be geography, it might be money, all that life stuff. And how do you navigate those as well? And I think at that point, I'm ready to say, okay, now, I can set you free. You've got everything you need now to do it. And that after that third act.
And I think it's so important. Like you said, you can go off and have all the ideation about this new career in Act 2, step off into the career. But if you've not fully transformed, you don't realize exactly how you got to being stuck in the first place, how you got unstuck, and you may end up being stuck again. So I think that's an incredible third act, is to the transformation process, so that you can identify those things a little bit sooner and continue this process as you move forward. Because as long as you're breathing, you're going to continue to evolve, right? That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, totally. And I think if you've anticipated this, the things that you might have to navigate before they come up, then what happens is when they do, you're not as flawed by them. You are confident. You think, I thought about this because I already made the pivot plan. So now it isn't that, but I'm agile. Career redesign is an agile process, so that's okay. And you have the mindset mastery, but you also have the sort of the intellectual, the cognitive heavy lifting done because you did it earlier. So
That's
yeah,
so
it's about
good.
staying unstuck.
Yes, that's so good. That's so good. And being ready for those things that and not pretending that they're not going to happen is what I heard you say. They could happen. And as
Yeah,
long as I'm open to that and I've now kind of gone through this process once, I know that I can get through it again. I've got some evidence and some history and some data points to support some
totally.
processes. So I think that's incredible.
Yes.
Man, I absolutely appreciate you coming on the show. And as we always like to end every podcast, we like our guests to share with the audience. You know, it's a lot of meat in this podcast, but if there were 5 final words that you could leave the audience with, what would those 5 words be? And then I'm going to also make sure your course, if you could tell us about your course, and then we'll go to the final 5 words: Purposeful Career Redesign course. So if you've gotten the book because you just feel the whisper, right? That's a great first place to start. But then there's some more things that you'll need to do. This is the companion to the book. So if you could share a little bit about that, and we'll be sure to link that in the show notes as well. And then we'll wrap up with your final 5 words. Tell us about the course.
Right. So the course was designed to be a companion to the book, as you just said. And I think if you think of the book as I've packed it with everything that you need to know what to do. But a book can only take you so far. And, you know, despite being a coach and having QR codes in every single chapter that lead to exercises and resources, it can only take you so far. If you just want a little bit more support, but you want to work through the process at your own pace, in your own space, then the course will get you sort of, I suppose, to go deeper into how. So now you're getting more help, much more detail that I had the space to fit in the book about how to apply all this to yourself. So it's beautifully bespoke at that point. There are also options to join a small curated cohort. So you've got the company of other career redesigners. If you know that accountability and camaraderie is important to sustain you, or equally you might prefer, or to add on as well, a little sprinkling of one-to-one time with me to just sort of make sure again that you don't get stuck in the process. And often it's very hard to anticipate what one person will find smooth, another person will find challenging. But if you're hesitating to get something done, that's your tell. You're stuck again, and you have access to a secret community where I spent a lot of time as well. So you really can't get stuck or stay stuck through the process with the course, and that was really the big purposeful point of it.
Awesome. So, like I mentioned, I'll have a link for the book Unstuck, Amazon bestseller, as well as the course in the show notes. And so, what would be the final 5 words that you would leave with the audience as we wrap up, Helen? And again, I appreciate you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, you're ever so welcome. I'm struggling to count my words. I think I want to say realign. It's going to be too many. Realign work you love with what matters to you most.
Okay. And I want you to
Probably
repeat that for
7 or 8.
And it's okay because it sounded amazing. Repeat that for the audience.
Realign work you love with the things that matter to you most.
That's incredible. The things that matter to you most is what really resonates there. And I think for anyone listening, when you hear that, you know what those things are. And so now you can just go do the work of being unstuck so that you can then, get to that end result. So we're just reverse engineering here today. And we want to thank Helen for providing such great content and doing such amazing work that's helping the world. And I know that it's going to help some of those in the audience. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to subscribe, follow the show, and make sure you turn on those notifications so you're aware when more incredible guests like Helen join us on the podcast here. And as I always end every podcast, I hope to see you here again in the same spot next week. And I love you. Have a good one. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed doing it for you. However, it doesn't have to end there. Come on over to our Facebook group community right now. You're going to get exclusive content that we weren't able to include in this episode as well as past episodes. We've got challenges, we've got research, we've got lives, you name it, all for you in bite-sized chunks so that you can continue this development journey. Go ahead, click the link right now in the description show notes, and we'll see you there.